Tonight, we are going back to a world that smelled like ink and hot paper, a world where making a copy was not a click, but a small act of labor. And we are following one invention that looks humble on the surface, a dusty trick of static electricity, but ends up quietly designing the way modern life stores, shares, and controls information. Because the story of Xerox is not really about a copier. It is about power. The power to duplicate, the power to distribute, the power to make an idea portable, official, and impossible to ignore. By the end of this video, you will understand how a patent clerk in Queens turned light into writing, how a risky leasing gamble rewired office behavior, and how a secret lab in Palo Alto built the interface logic behind nearly every screen you touch today. If you like documentaries that treat technology as culture and not just gadgets, subscribe. And stay to the end because the last chapter explains the strangest twist of all. Xerox invented the future, then watched other companies sell it back to the world. Now let us begin. Before the digital world learned how to duplicate itself without friction, the act of copying was physical. It was a job you could hear and smell. It sounded like keys striking metal. It smelled like ink, solvent, hot paper, and tired wool coats in crowded rooms. In the offices of the 1930s, information did not glide. It trudged. If a manager needed 10 copies of a contract, the world offered two choices, neither elegant. You could retype the page again and again, letting fatigue set your rhythm. Or you could slide carbon paper between sheets and press hard enough to bruise the fibers, accepting the purple smudges that stained fingers and cuffs as the price of administrative life. Even the best typists left behind a haze of error, a slipped letter, a line too light, a corner misaligned. Never quite a twin. It was a sibling raised under pressure. That is the first thing to understand about the age before Xerox. Copying was not a button. It was labor. It was time. It was money. It was a bottleneck in the bloodstream of organizations that were growing faster than their clerical tools could handle. In a world that was inventing mass production and global management, the office remained, in a quiet way, medieval. The factory had conveyors and gauges. The office had carbon and some revolutions begin as grand visions. This one began as irritation. Chester Carlson did not look like a myth. He looked like a man who had learned to endure. He was a patent attorney, trained to read and file and preserve the precise language of invention. He worked in rooms filled with other people's ideas, and what haunted him was how hard it was to keep those ideas organized. Patent work was copying work. It demanded duplicates. It demanded legibility. It demanded repetition. And repetition, in that era, demanded body. Carlson was not trying to build a glamorous machine. He was trying to escape an everyday punishment. He wanted a method, a trick of physics, an alchemy that could turn light into ink without the wet mess of photographic chemistry. He was looking for something dry, clean, and obedient. In 1938, in a cramped room in Astoria, Queens, he staged an experiment that sounds almost too modest for the world it would eventually create. A zinc plate, a coating of sulfur, a silk cloth to charge the surface with static, a glass slide with words written on it, a bright lamp. The setup belonged more to a classroom than to an industrial prophecy. But the principle was profound. Static electricity is usually treated as annoyance, a crackle on winter skin, a spark from a doorknob. Carlson treated it as a tool. Photoconductivity, the fact that certain materials change their electrical behavior when hit by light, became the second tool. Charge a surface evenly. Shine light where you want the charge to disappear. Block the light where you want charge to remain. Then dust the surface with a fine powder that clings to what is still charged. Press paper against it. Add heat. Let the powder melt into fibers. The image is transferred. The copy is born. It is difficult to appreciate how strange this would have felt at the time. The copy, in most people's minds, belonged to ink and pressure, or to photography and chemicals. Carlson's copy belonged to electrons. It belonged to invisible forces. The letters were not written, they were attracted. He called it xerography, dry writing. The name is almost a manifesto, dry, clean, modern. It promised to remove the office from the sticky 19th century and place it in a future where information could replicate without leaving stain. The miracle happened. The words appeared. The date. The place. Proof. Then nothing happened. For 8 years, Carlson carried his miracle like an awkward object no one wanted to hold. He pitched it to the giants, the companies whose names felt like gravity: IBM, RCA, General Electric. The responses were polite, sometimes dismissive, often uninterested. The invention seemed too finicky, too complex, too unpredictable. The office already had mimeographs. It already had carbon paper. It had a working equilibrium of inconvenience. Why gamble on a fragile new method that demanded careful control of charge, powder, heat, humidity, and mechanical time? There is a particular blindness that comes from a world that works well enough. It is not that people cannot imagine improvement. It is that they cannot imagine a new habit. A copier is not merely a machine, it is a behavior. It is an excuse to duplicate. It is a cultural permission slip to make more paper than you think you need. That permission did not exist yet. So the market, in the minds of experts, looked small. Carlson, meanwhile, was nearing the edge that many inventors reach. The place where the invention survives, but the inventor cannot. Financial pressure, doubt, the long humiliation of being told again and again that your problem is not important enough. His persistence was not heroic in the cinematic sense. It was grinding. He kept going because the alternative was to accept that the office would remain a place where copying was pain. In 1946, a company that was not supposed to change history noticed him. Haloid was a small photography firm in Rochester, New York, living under the shadow of Kodak. If Kodak was an empire, Haloid was a provincial town. That is what made it hungry. It needed a new direction, a gamble that could turn survival into dominance. Joseph C. Wilson, Haloid's leader, understood something rare in corporate life. He understood that the risk of changing was smaller than the risk of staying the same. Kodak could crush Haloid if Haloid kept playing Kodak's game. Xerox, still only a word in the future, was a way to stop playing. Wilson did not simply license Carlson's invention. He bet the company's identity on it. He poured money into research that did not look like the sure path of a profitable product. He asked engineers to take a dusty experiment and turn it into a machine that could be used by ordinary people in ordinary offices. He asked them to translate physics into routine. This is where the story shifts from lonely invention to industrial transformation, from a man and a plate to a corporation and a system. And it is where the true difficulty reveals itself. Inventing a principle is one thing. Packaging it into a reliable machine is another. Xerography required an orchestra of processes, each needing to happen with the right timing and the right tolerances. The surface must hold charge evenly. The exposure must be precise. The toner must be the right size and consistency. The transfer must be clean. The fusing must melt toner without burning paper. The drum must rotate smoothly. The machine must not shock the operator. It must not ignite the room. In the late 1940s and throughout the 1950s, Haloid's engineers faced a kind of engineering Everest. Selenium became one of the central materials, a photoconductor that could hold charge and release it under light. Coating a drum with selenium in a uniform layer was not trivial. Automating the steps without creating a machine that behaved like a temperamental laboratory instrument was not trivial. And then there was heat. Heat is the quiet villain of many office technologies. It is necessary, then dangerous. In a copier, heat is the final binding, the moment the powder becomes permanent. But paper is a fuel. A jam is not merely an inconvenience. It is a pause in a furnace. Xerox engineers confronted the reality that their machine could, under ordinary failure, become a fire. Their early devices were often awkward and semi-manual, used to create masters for other processes. The dream of a push-button plain paper copier remained just that, a dream. Wilson also recognized something else. Names matter. Electrophotography sounded like a technical lecture. Xerography sounded like a spell. Xerox, as a brand, sounded sharp, futuristic, and strangely inevitable. A single word you could stamp onto an era. By the late 1950s, Haloid had spent a staggering amount, more than its business could comfortably bear. It was approaching bankruptcy territory, the place where a vision becomes negligence in the eyes of accountants. The company was building a machine that had to work, not because it would be nice, but because there was no longer a safe retreat. The machine was the Xerox 914. If you want to understand how technology changes culture, study the 914. Not because it was elegant, it was not. Not because it was small, it was not. It was heavy, complex, and by modern standards, almost absurd. Yet it introduced a new expectation to the world. It made a copy on plain paper with a single button. No special coated sheets, no messy chemistry, no carbon. Just place an original press and receive a clean duplicate that felt like it had always existed. The number 914 came from its capability to copy sheets up to 9 by 14 inches. But the meaning of the name was larger than dimensions. It marked the moment copying stopped being an ordeal and became a reflex. The machine was also, in a practical sense, dangerous. It fused toner with high heat. Paper jams happened. Fires happened. Xerox did not delay the product for a perfect redesign. Instead, it did something that now feels almost like an artifact from a more blunt era of engineering. It included a small fire extinguisher with every unit. It even gave that extinguisher a friendlier name, a scorch eliminator, a marketing phrase that tried to convert a hazard into a quirky feature. That decision strange as it sounds, is a clue to Xerox's deeper talent. Xerox was willing to accept imperfection if it could ship the behavior. It prioritized getting the habit into offices over achieving the purest design. Then came the second stroke of genius, and in some ways, the greater one. The 914 was expensive to build. Selling it outright would have limited adoption to the richest organizations. Xerox did not sell it. Xerox leased it. A monthly fee that made the machine feel attainable. A bundled allowance of copies that invited people to use it. And a per-page price after that allowance that turned usage into a river of revenue. This model did more than create profit. It created a new relationship between humans and duplication. When copying is costly and inconvenient, people avoid it. When copying is easy and semi-prepaid, people explore it. They copy memos, they copy articles, they copy personal documents. They copy because they can. Xerox expected modest volumes. The world responded with a flood. Offices did not merely adopt copying. They discovered copying. The 914 became an altar in corporate space, a machine around which paper accumulated like snowdrifts. Employees lined up to feed it originals. They copied out of necessity and out of curiosity. It was, in an almost comedic way, a new toy that happened to be a tool. The company's revenues exploded. Xerox became synonymous with copying itself, a brand name drifting toward becoming a verb. It became a Wall Street darling. It became, for a time, a company that looked like it had discovered an infinite business, because the appetite for copies seemed infinite. And here's where the story turns, because success creates its own kind of trap. Xerox became so good at the world of paper that it began to imagine the future as more paper. It became so fluent in the economics of toner and leases and maintenance that it started to see every technological question through the shape of the copier. When an organization is printing money, it becomes emotionally invested in the present. The future is not an opportunity. It is a risk to the machine that is feeding you. By the end of the 1960s, Xerox's leaders could feel a strange anxiety rising underneath their confidence. They had dominated the office, but a new creature was growing in basements and universities: the computer. At that time, computers were mainframes, huge and centralized, fed by punch cards, guarded by specialists. They did not look like a threat to Xerox because they did not resemble office life. Yet Xerox's leaders could sense a shift. Information might stop living primarily on paper. If that happened, Xerox's empire, built on copying paper, would become a magnificent relic. The company needed to own not merely the act of copying documents, but the structure by which information moved and lived. It needed to become an architecture company, not just a document company. This is where Jack Goldman's proposal becomes one of the most consequential bets in technology history. Xerox would build a research center not to improve copiers, but to invent the office of the future. And crucially, it would place that center far from Rochester, far from the gravitational pull of the copier business. 3,000 miles away, near Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. The Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, was not designed as a factory for incremental improvements. It was designed as an island where ambitious people could act like the future was their job. If Rochester was suits and hierarchy, PARC would be sandals and arguments. If Rochester was process, PARC would be possibility. To lead the center, Xerox brought in scientific leadership, but the soul of PARC took shape under Robert Taylor, a visionary who had worked at ARPA, the same world that had begun wiring computers together into the network that would eventually become the Internet. Taylor's instinct was not to hire ordinary employees. It was to recruit people who wanted to build worlds. His strategy was simple and radical. Find the smartest researchers, give them resources, minimize bureaucracy, tell them to invent. In corporate life, this sounds like a fantasy, but Xerox, flush with copier profits, could afford fantasy. And sometimes, fantasy is simply a name for research that has not yet become obvious. PARC quickly became a cultural anomaly. In the early 1970s, the typical corporate lab still behaved like a corporate office with better equipment. PARC behaved like a university department and an artist commune in a war room, all braided together. People sat on bean bags. They argued in hallways. They designed systems not because the market demanded them, but because the future required them. The mission was condensed into an audacious phrase, the office of the future. And to build that office, PARC needed to reverse the existing assumptions of computing. At the time, computing was batch processing. You did not interact with a computer in real time. You prepared inputs, delivered them, waited, and received outputs, often on paper. The computer was a distant machine. It was not personal. It was not conversational. It was not visual. It was a bureaucratic god. PARC wanted something else. It wanted personal computing. Not small computers doing old tasks, but a new relationship between human thought and digital representation. Alan Kay, one of the core visionaries, imagined a device he called the Dynabook, a kind of portable personal computer that could be used by children, a medium for learning and thinking. The hardware of the day could not produce a true Dynabook, but PARC could build an interim step, a desktop machine that embodied the philosophy. And that machine became the Alto. In 1973, the Alto came alive, and to outsiders it looked like an odd cabinet with a screen that stood upright like a page rather than a television. But the Alto was a portal. It contained a microprocessor built to support interactive work. It contained a bitmap display, meaning the screen was not limited to characters in the grid. Every pixel could be controlled. That single design decision opened a door, because if every pixel can be controlled, the computer can draw, not merely print text, but create shapes, images, icons, and the visual language that humans naturally understand. However, a screen that can draw is not enough. Humans need a way to manipulate what they see. The command line, the old method, forced users to translate their intentions into a rigid syntax. It demanded memorization and patience. PARC wanted directness. It wanted a person to point at information and move it, to select, to change, to reorganize. This is where the mouse, originally invented earlier by Douglas Engelbart, becomes more than a curiosity. PARC refined it. They made it usable. They built software that treated it as the hand of the mind. From this came the interface logic that now feels so normal it is almost invisible. Windows, icons, menus, pointers. A desktop metaphor where files appear as documents, and documents live in folders, and unwanted things go to a trash can. It was not merely a user interface. It was a translation layer between human habits and digital structure. It allowed people to use a computer without first becoming a programmer. The brilliance of the desktop metaphor was not that it was literally true. A computer is not a desk. The files are not paper. The folders are not cardboard. The brilliance was that it borrowed the mental furniture of office life and used it to teach people how to think in digital terms. It gave users a familiar world to move through, while they quietly learned an unfamiliar one. At PARC, this interface was not built as a surface decoration. It was built as the visible edge of deeper software philosophy. And that philosophy, arguably the most important hidden revolution at PARC, was small talk. Before small talk, software often felt like machinery. You wrote a program, compiled it, ran it, and hoped it behaved. Small talk introduced a different imagination. Software could be alive. It could be changed while running. It could be explored and modified interactively. The system itself could be a studio, not just a factory. Small talk was a language, but it was also an environment. It treated everything on the screen as an object, a thing with behavior and data, a thing that could receive messages and respond. A window was an object. A button was an object. Text was an object. Even a letter could be treated as something with properties. This object-oriented approach made the interface not just possible, but flexible. It allowed software to become modular. It allowed systems to grow without collapsing under their own complexity. This is also where editing, the act of manipulating information, changed permanently. Larry Tesler and Timothy Mott, working on a word processor called Gypsy, focused on something deceptively simple. How do people edit paper? They cut, they copy, they paste. On paper, that is literal scissors and glue. In a computer, it had been awkward, filled with modes and commands that made editing feel like operating a machine rather than shaping thought. Tesler advocated for modelless interaction. The user should not have to remember what mode they are in to avoid disaster. Editing should be direct. Select text, remove it, duplicate it, insert it elsewhere. Cut, copy, paste, not as a gimmick, but as a basic grammar of thought. This invention is so embedded now that it feels like a natural law, but it was designed, it was argued over, it was coded into being. It reduced the cognitive load of writing and made digital text feel like clay. At the same time, PARC confronted another subtle truth. If the office of the future was going to replace paper, the digital representation of documents had to be beautiful and trustworthy. Early computer text was monospaced, every letter the same width, like a typewriter. That was functional, but it did not resemble the printed world Xerox understood. Xerox was, at heart, a company of typography and layout. So PARC pushed typography into the digital realm. Researchers developed systems for proportional fonts, for better rendering, for smoothing edges so letters did not look like jagged staircases of pixels. They explored how screens could show what paper would show so the user could trust what they were making. This desire converged into the concept that would define the next era of office work. What you see is what you get. The first bitmapped word processors, Bravo, and later more refined systems, allowed users to see formatting on screen as it would appear in print. Before that, documents were coded representations with hidden commands for bold or italic. WYSIWYG made layout visible. It made the screen a true page, and it turned the computer into a publishing tool, not merely a computation tool. This is one of the great ironies of the so-called paperless office. By making documents easier to format and print, PARC helped create an explosion of paper. The office did not abandon printing. It printed more because it could. But PARC was not only building the relationship between one person and one computer. It was building the relationship between many computers. This required a network, a nervous system. Robert Metcalfe focused on a problem that sounds simple, but is fundamental. How do many machines share one communication medium without chaos? If two computers send data at the same time, the signals collide. The system must detect collision, pause, and retry. Metcalfe designed a protocol that treated communication like a social contract. Listen before speaking. If two speak at once, both stop. Wait a random interval. Try again. It is polite behavior translated into electrical rules. From this came Ethernet, the local area network that would become the backbone of offices and, in a deeper sense, the foundational logic for much of modern connectivity. Computers at PARC were connected. They shared files. They sent electronic mail. They used servers. They built a miniature future where information moved as packets, not as stacks of paper carried by hands. So by the mid-1970s, PARC had built an office that looked hauntingly like the one we now recognize. Personal workstations, graphical interfaces, network communication, digital documents. Yet Xerox, the parent company, did not know how to translate that into a product. This was not because Xerox executives were stupid. It was because they were successful. They asked the question that, in their world, was rational. How does this sell more copiers? How does this increase toner revenue? How does it fit the leasing model? To PARC, the answer was obvious. The computer would become the new center of office work. To Rochester, the answer was uncertain. The Alto was expensive. It did not obviously generate per-page revenue. It looked to some eyes like a toy. Xerox had created a split personality. In the East, copier kings protected a profitable machine. In the West, digital wizards built a future that threatened that machine. Corporate life rarely rewards the wing that threatens the current profit stream, even when that wing is saving the company from the next century. There was one PARC-related invention, however, that Xerox did understand immediately because it fit the company's cultural instincts: printing. The story of the laser printer begins not in the relaxed atmosphere of Palo Alto, but in the pressure cooker of Xerox's facilities in New York. Gary Starkweather, an optical engineer, saw a limitation in the traditional copier. Copiers used light reflected from a physical original. If you wanted to print something generated by a computer, that approach was clumsy. You would need a physical image to copy, which defeated the purpose. Starkweather wanted to draw the image directly onto the xerographic drum, using a computer-controlled light source. He wanted to use a laser. To managers shaped by the copier world, the idea felt risky and unnecessary. Lasers were expensive and exotic. They belonged to laboratories, not office machines. Starkweather was told to stop, in some accounts threatened. But he saw the inevitability. If computers were going to generate documents, printers needed to translate digital patterns into toner at speed and precision. In a moment that reveals how fragile innovation can be inside corporations, Starkweather essentially forced a migration. He appealed to Jack Goldman. "Move me to California or I quit." Goldman understood what Xerox internal politics could not. He brought Starkweather to PARC, where freedom could protect the idea. At PARC, Starkweather combined the Alto with a modified copier and built a system that used a modulated laser beam swept across a rotating drum by a fast-spinning mirror assembly. The laser turned on and off in response to digital data, painting the pattern as a charge image. Toner adhered. Paper received the image. Heat fused it. The result was printing at a quality and speed that traditional impact printers could not match. When Xerox management saw the implications, they saw money they could recognize, not in the abstract future of graphical workstations, but in the concrete business of printing volumes of paper in high-value contexts. Bank statements, insurance policies, bills, variable data printing where each page could be different, produced at speed. The Xerox 9700 and related systems became financial juggernauts. They generated enormous revenue and, in a strange way, subsidized the very research that Xerox was failing to commercialize. The laser printer, the rebel invention once resisted, became a pillar of Xerox survival. By around 1980, the future office was technically complete inside PARC. Workstations, GUI, Ethernet, laser printing. The architecture existed. All the pieces were on the table. And then, in one of the most famous transfers of technological fire, Xerox opened the doors. Steve Jobs, in the late 1979, was searching for the next leap. Apple had the Apple II, but Jobs could sense that text-based computing would not carry the masses. He wanted an interface that felt human. Xerox venture interests wanted a stake in Apple's IPO. Jobs, always negotiating, offered a trade. Access to shares in exchange for access to PARC. 2 visits, guided tours, demonstration. To Xerox executives, this was harmless. PARC's inventions felt distant from Xerox's core business. To Jobs, it was oxygen. Larry Tesler demonstrated the GUI concepts, the mouse-driven interaction, the windowed environment, the network possibilities. Jobs reacted with the kind of intensity that reveals recognition. He did not see a toy. He saw the consumer future. He saw computers becoming appliances. He saw a path to a machine his mother could use. This is the tragedy and the lesson. Xerox saw a research curiosity. Jobs saw a product religion. Xerox did attempt commercialization with the Xerox Star, released in 1981. It was, in many ways, the first true product that packaged the PARC interface ideas into a professional system. It had windows, icons, Ethernet, and integration with laser printing. It was also expensive, slow relative to its ambition, and positioned toward large corporate buyers. It demanded a market that was not ready to spend that much for that kind of newness. It was too early and too costly, and Xerox did not have the product instinct to simplify and evangelize the way Apple would. Meanwhile, Jobs returned to Cupertino to build the Lisa and then the Macintosh. machines that distilled PARC's ideas into a consumer mythology. They were not cheap, but they were within a new realm of possibility. The interface became the selling point. The mouse became normal. The desktop metaphor became a language. Microsoft followed with Windows, and the graphical interface became the default face of personal computing. Ethernet became ubiquitous. The printing languages and typography ideas seeded new empires. The modern office, the one PARC had built in miniature, spread across the world. And PARC's people began to leave, not always out of bitterness, but out of inevitability. When you have invented a future and your company will not claim it, you find somewhere else that will. Talented researchers departed to build the tools the world would use: word processors, spreadsheet systems, networking companies with publishing systems. Adobe, founded by former PARC people, carried PostScript and the deeper logic of digital typography into the heart of modern printing and design. The spark became a wildfire, and Xerox, astonishingly, was not the visible name on the flame. So did Xerox fail. In popular culture, Xerox became a cautionary tale, the company that invented the future and gave it away. Business schools taught the Xerox story as a parable of missed opportunity. But in the quieter reality of corporate survival, Xerox did not collapse. It did not vanish. It chose a path that was less glamorous but still powerful. Xerox remained a document company. It doubled down on what it could monetize with confidence: high-end printing, office workflows, systems for moving information onto paper at scale. For decades, massive organizations produced the documents that defined administrative life using Xerox machines. Bills, policies, statements, notices, forms. The world became more digital, yes, but it also became more document-heavy. The state and the corporation did not stop needing paper merely because screens existed. In many places, screens increased paperwork because they increased the speed of creating paperwork. This is one of the most enduring ironies of the paperless office prediction. The prediction assumed that digital documents would replace paper. The reality was that digital documents made paper cheaper to generate. It made printing more precise. It made formatting more accessible. It made duplication effortless. Paper did not disappear, it multiplied. 1990s and into the 21st century, Xerox faced the same tension again, the need to reinvent as the world shifted. The internet reduced the need to move paper as a communication medium. Email, file sharing, and web-based workflows changed how organizations distribute information. Xerox responded not only with machines, but with services. It leaned into managing processes, back-office systems, and document-intensive operations. It tried to become a company that managed workflows rather than merely producing hardware. PARC itself continued as a research institution, sometimes reorganized, sometimes spun into different corporate structures, but its influence remained. The underlying ideas PARC nurtured had already escaped into the world. They no longer needed Xerox to exist. They had become part of how technology thought. And that is the ghost in the machine. The way Xerox's true legacy lives, not as a single product line, not even as a brand, but as an invisible layer of modern life. The screen you read is a descendant of the bitmap displays that made pixels controllable. The windows you open, the icons you recognize, the menus that structure your choices, the pointer that acts as your hand inside a virtual space, all descend from that interface logic shaped in the 1970s. The idea that a document is a thing you can manipulate visually, rather than a set of commands you must recite, is a cultural revolution as much as a technical one. The networking that connects devices, whether through a cable in a wall or through the air by wireless protocols, borrows from Ethernet's fundamental assumptions about packets, collisions, and shared mediums. The languages and software systems that treat applications as interacting components echo the object-oriented thinking that Smalltalk embodied so early. Even the casual instinct to select text and move it elsewhere, to cut and paste, not as a trick, but as a basic move of thought, is a design behavior that came from people who wanted computers to feel less like machines and more like collaborators. Xerox did not merely build a copier. It built a doorway between physical documents and digital abstraction. It began with a man in Queens rubbing sulfur with silk to summon static, and it expanded into a world where information could be treated as a fluid thing, visible, manipulable network. If there is a final symbolic image that captures Xerox, it is not a machine. It is a moment. The moment when copying becomes so easy that you stop thinking about it. When replication becomes cheap enough to be invisible. When information moves from being a precious artifact you guard to being a thing you distribute casually. That shift changes how organizations think. It changes how bureaucracy works. It changes how culture circulates. It changes how ideas spread. Because copying is not neutral. Copying is power. To copy is to preserve. To copy is to share. To copy is to control narratives and evidence and memory. The photocopier made institutions more efficient, but it also made them more paper-heavy. It made it easier to distribute policies and propaganda. It made it easier to archive and to surveil and to standardize. It accelerated bureaucracy, which is another way of saying it accelerated the production of official reality. Then PARC accelerated a different power. The power to manipulate information directly, to edit, to reorganize, to create documents that are not merely typed, but designed, to network them, to send them instantly, to make the office not a room of paper, but a room of representations on screen. This is why the Xerox story feels even now like a myth about invention and hesitation. It is the story of a company that achieved dominance by solving a physical bottleneck, then tried to solve a conceptual bottleneck, and in doing so, created the foundations of a new age. Yet the company's own success made it cautious. It could fund the future, but it could not fully become it. We began in the world of carbon and smudge, a world where making 10 copies meant 10 acts of labor, where the copy carried the smell of effort. Xerox changed that. It made duplication feel like an entitlement. Then PARC changed something deeper. It made the manipulation of information feel like a natural extension of human thought. It created a grammar of interaction that still shapes how billions of people live with machines. So every time you open a window, you are touching an idea that was once radical. Every time you move a file into a folder, you are performing a metaphor designed to teach you digital space. Every time you print, you are watching light paint charge onto a drum, toner cling to an invisible pattern, and heat fuse powder into permanence. Every time you cut and paste, You are acting out an office gesture translated into code by people who wanted computing to feel less like obedience and more like shaping. The Xerox legacy is not simply that it built a world of copies. It is that it revealed what copying really is, not the mechanical act of duplication, but the cultural act of making information mobile. In the end, Chester Carlson was not only solving his own daily frustration, he was solving a human problem. The problem of memory, the problem of distribution, the problem of making an idea survive beyond a single sheet of paper. He could not have predicted the screens, the networks, the interface metaphors, the entire architecture that would follow. He only knew that the office, as it existed, was wasting human life on repetition. He wanted to free that life. He charged a plate. He shone a light. He let shadows preserve charge. He sprinkled powder. He pressed paper. He used heat to make the powder permanent. A small ritual of physics that would become an invisible ritual embedded in modern reality. And if the story leaves us with a final lesson, it is this. Technology does not change the world merely by existing. It changes the world by changing what feels normal. Xerox made copying normal. PARC made direct manipulation of information normal. And now, long after the company's most famous missed opportunity has become a classroom parable, the deeper truth remains. The modern world still lives inside the architecture Xerox funded and PARC designed, not as a logo on a box, but as the assumptions behind every interface, every document, every networked exchange of text and image. The alchemist's dust did not disappear. It became the invisible powder that coats the modern age, clinging to our habits, fusing into our daily rituals, and reminding us that the future is often invented long before it is recognized. If you want, I can extend any section into a deeper dive in the same voice, including a longer, more granular sequence on the Xerox star, and why it failed as a product despite being right as a concept, or a deeper cultural analysis of how photocopying reshaped activism, education, and office politics in the late 20th century. If you made it this far, you have just watched one of the most important and most misunderstood origin stories of the modern world. A single charged plate becomes a machine becomes a habit becomes an economy, and an economy becomes an interface, a network, a new architecture of information that spreads everywhere, even when the original architects do not get the credit. And if this story felt familiar, it should. Every time you click, every time you save, every time you drag a file into a folder, you are living inside ideas that were once locked inside a Xerox lab. So here's the question to take with you. How many other futures are being invented right now, inside companies that cannot yet imagine what they are holding? If you want more long-form, high-production documentaries like this, hit the like button so the algorithm knows this kind of story matters. Subscribe for the next episode. And if you want to go deeper, check the pinned comment. I will leave extra reading, key names, and the timeline so you can explore the rabbit hole at your own pace. And tell me in the comments, do you think Xerox failed or did they succeed in a different way? Because depending on how you answer that, you are also answering what innovation really means. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.